And here on today's podcast of Poho's Bullpen, I have the author of Hall of Name, DB Firstman. Of course, I've loved so much of your work in the past for Sabre, especially on your project about the three outcomes. Glad to have you on the bullpen today.
Thanks for having me, Seth.
And going from, reading some of your past work with Sabre there, seeing you write a book about, baseball players, unusual names, and following you on social media and seeing how much you love unique wordplay, it seemed like as if it was like the perfect marriage for your first book.
I have always been interested in words and word origins, and I play tournament Scrabble, so I'm always about new words and where they came from, and anagramming and things of that nature. And names were just an extension because they're basic words, but they refer to people. So the names aspect of it was pretty pretty understandable for me to follow. And names, baseball players have great names. I mean, the athletes of yesteryear and even today, they just have wonderful names. And I'm not even talking like Mickey Mantle. I'm talking Urban Shocker and Jack Glasscock and people like that from yesteryear. My blog, Value Over Replacement Grid, I had a regular feature where I basically ran through, I did profiles of baseball player names that I found interesting, whether it was Doug Goosh or Billy Joe Robideau or people like that. And I did a bunch of work for, Baseball Prospectus and Hardball Times. And I wrote an article on the 3 true outcomes for Sabre that you mentioned. And I was really looking for some sort of book project. I was looking for something, a bit more substantial to really sink my teeth into. And going back to 2012, I had the idea of putting these player profile, these name profiles into a book. And I brought it to a couple of small publishers that deal with this kind of niche publishing, niche subject matter. And they said, personally, we love the topic, but we don't think it's going to sell. So flash forward 6 or 7 years, and it's 2018 or so, and I'm thinking of what I want to write about, and I'm like, you know what? I want to write about the names. I want to write about baseball names. And in that period of time, from 2012 to 18, the world of self-publishing really exploded, and it became much more accessible. So I decided I'm not going to go through the whole process of writing up a book proposal for these small publishers again. I'm just going to go and write the book. So that's basically what I did. I just took a year and wrote 100 profiles of 100 different players, and there we go. That's how we came up with a book.
And I mean, your book is really comprehensive. I mean, it goes just beyond just like, hey, this guy has a very interesting name. It's like you go all the way down to, obviously they're, when and where they played, what position, the name's origin, in some cases where the parents got the idea of naming their kid this and then eventually became a baseball player, their playing career and what they did well after that. I mean, you really packed in a lot of information in a very nicely detail oriented book there on all these player names. It's got to be, I almost kind of wonder, I mean, what was the real challenging part in terms of doing your research for the book?
Well, I wanted the book to be something more than just a look at that funny name, as you mentioned. I wasn't looking to make fun of these names. I wanted to educate and inform people about the origins of some of these names. And in some of these cases, the players themselves, their careers really didn't have much substance to them. They had a cup of coffee in the major leagues. They barely got out of the minors, or some of them had longer careers, but a lot of them, you may not have heard of before this book. And frankly, I didn't hear of some of these players before I started researching and writing this book. So I really wanted to focus on the lives of the players themselves and the origin stories of their names. I wanted to sort of give a hybrid concept of a reference book and a book of, a lighthearted look at the names. And so for those that I did not have a lot of information on, and I consulted, I had a ton of reference books from McFarland and University of Nebraska Press does a lot of the niche publishing for baseball reference type of books. And so I had a lot of player biographies from them. And then a lot of my source material came from the Society for American Baseball Research SABR Baseball Bio Project, which is an online encyclopedia of about 5,000 different entries where the volunteers, this is an all volunteer, endeavor, basically write, research and write up biographies of players, executives, owners, managers, anybody who was noteworthy in baseball. And so that between those two sources and newspapers.com and ancestry.com, I managed to cobble together, a good story for the vast majority of the 100 players I profiled. Some of them didn't really have much of a story. They had a cup of coffee and they lived a quiet life before and after. Others had had tremendous life stories. They had their trials and tribulations. There were suicides. There was murder, there was alcoholism, there was infidelity. They were human just like you and I. And so I wanted to tell those stories too.
And you really did a great job. I mean, it kind of in a way for me, I mean, but then again, like I always feel like I'm weird when I read some books like this, but like I was telling you before we started recording that I read that book in 2 nights, and you had me by the first entry in the book, which was
Boof Bonser.
Boof Bonser, formerly known as John, according to what Baseball America's Prospect book said, that he changed it to Boof in high school. And I remember him because I grew up in Rochester, New York, so I went to a ton of Rochester Red Wings games, and it was around the mid-2000s when he was coming up through the Twins system that he would have spent his time when, he looked like he was at first a promising starting pitcher, but he was just, more or less I think as Baseball America referred to him as a Rick Russell-esque build with a declining fastball. But I mean, for him, it was like, let's remember some guys, because I remember him vividly from like 05 and 06, particularly like around that time, because he was part of that rotation where you had guys like Scott Baker, who ended up getting into the major leagues as well as Bonser. But more importantly, Francisco Liriano, because he was a big deal for the Red Wings around that time. And it's just one of those things that kind of like, you just read that book and you're like, man, I remember actually I probably have seen Boof Bonser pitch in a live major league, or not a live major league game, but a live minor league baseball game. And to think about that from the context of that book, I mean, to me, it was just like remarkable being able to kind of see that and kind of, read more about it.
Yeah, I'm glad you really enjoyed the first one, and these players led very interesting lives, before and after their careers. Some of them were bonus babies or high draft picks, but a lot of them were just struggling to get to the majors and then stay there. And so I detailed their path. What they. Part of the profile is what they did while they were major leaguers, and then another part of the profile is like the before and after, what they did, how they got to the majors, and then what they did after their careers were over. So Boof Bonser, the great thing about Boof is that he got his nickname from his mother, who nicknamed all her kids, and had her nickname of her own. So it was just a family thing with the Bonsers. So.
Oh, she just helped you out in your book already there more than would have made the show.
Right, right.
But like to me, like especially now with the fact that we've been separated from being able to enjoy live baseball games, the book was such a great escape in a way. To be able to kind of have that lighthearted thing as you're still kind of waiting for games. And unfortunately, obviously, with more information coming out, it feels like as if it's going to be even more of a broken season with how many guys are going to come down with COVID. It almost kind of conjured up the idea that, we might get more great baseball names in the near future, some of these prospects knocking on the door.
That could happen. I mean, unfortunately, from the perspective of having established major leaguers come down with COVID and then having to be replaced by these player pools that each club is going to have access to, we're going to get a lot of career minor leaguers who have great names themselves, and we may not have heard about them otherwise, except that now they're going to get their chance, as you mentioned. So, and then who knows what comes April of 2021, whether we start this whole process over again with career minor leaguers making major league rosters or not.
And to kind of shift gears back, looking at this project from your perspective, in terms of writing your book, what was one player that you kind of learned about that really drew a lot of interest from you as you kept on learning more and more about this player for your book?
I was interested. I was drawn to Hazen Shirley Kyler, better known as Kai Kyler. First of all, it's not Kiki, as we all thought. It's Kai. And I managed to get in touch with Mr. Kyler's great grandson, who happens to be a mutual friend of mine. I have a friend in the theater business who knows Kyler who's a theater producer. So I managed to talk to the great grandson of Kai Kyler, and I asked him about the origin of his, of Kai's name, because, how did he get the name Kai? Was it because, and the story was supposedly that Kai had a stuttering problem, and that's how he got his name. And the great grandson said that is absolutely positively false. There was no such stuttering problem for him. He got the name Kai as a shortening of the last name Kyler, and that the other outfielders would call Kai to let him know that it was his ball in the outfield. And so I started, I had a real affinity for him, because I have a few friends that have a stuttering problem. I have, the more I looked into his career, I was astonished. I knew of him, but I didn't really know the kind of performer he was during that era. I mean, this was the 1920s into the 1930s, and he was basically a five-tool player for a good 10-year span. He put up numbers in all sorts of categories. He had 1 year where he had like 90 extra base hits and 40 stolen bases, and played stellar outfield and hit well in the World Series. And I was just like, you know Ruth, Garrick, the 27 Yankees, but do you know Kai Kyler? And I was so enamored with him, and I started to tout, like, okay, most underrated player of the 1920s. And I went out and I got a couple of his baseball cards. So I really fell in love with Kai Kyler.
That threw me off too, because I was like I just you see the name and you just always just say Kiki. Like it's
Right.
Even, and I feel like as if it's one of those things where it's like you assume that it's exactly what it is, even after reading it, and you're like, I still think it's Kiki. That's amazing, though. And
Yep.
I just love that added appreciation by, the more you learn about something like that. Unbelievable.
Mhm.
Again, the name of the book is Hall of Name, DB Firstman. I absolutely loved it. I'm not saying that just because I got a copy of it. I absolutely loved it. It's a fun read. And honestly, I'm really glad that you were able to share that brilliant research that you did on this book, because it's thorough but yet concise. And for any baseball fan, it was a great read, especially during a period where we don't have any live baseball to watch.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It was fun to research. I learned a lot about various players that I might not have known otherwise, and I hope I managed to, like I said, it's a hybrid. It's a reference book, and it's supposed to entertain you. It's supposed to make you chuckle at some of the names, or I do anagrams of names, or not to be confused with other names. And the appreciation of the name, I sort of give a little personal sort of thought about what I think about the name, what it reminds me of. So I'm trying to sort of paint a picture of the player from different perspectives.
I thought you did a great job with it. And again, it's Hall of Name by DB Firstman. Pick it up. It's a great book. And again, thanks for coming onto the bullpen and talking about it.
Thank you so much. I had a great time.